when I would see a young Black girl in the crowd looking at Kamala Harris, I would always remain composed, but internally sobbing, because thinking about what that little girl got to see that Kamala Harris didn't get to see, that none of us got to see, right? A woman in that role. The less we are able to show women in their full dignity and authority, political, business, sports, all of the arenas in which women are public figures, the less that we have better representation behind the camera to make sure that those people in front of the camera are taken seriously, the less you feel comfortable with the idea of a woman in this type of power and in this type of authority.
Change the Reel with Monique Velasquez
and Piper Kessler.
For more than 20 years, we've worked in video production behind the scenes, helping mission-driven organizations and leaders.
This podcast exists for leaders who know their stories matter and are ready to stop guessing and start using video strategically to further their mission.
Not just fill a content calendar.
Each month, we drop 2 types of episodes.
One with Piper and I kicking it, sharing production insight from our own work,
and another featuring real stories about using media to create change
and connection. This is Change the Reel.
Representation starts here.
Hey y'all, I'm Monique Velasquez.
And I'm Piper Kessler. Today, I'm excited to get to know and introduce our guest, Azza Cohen. I want you to know that Monique read your Slate article in January 2025, and it was amazing to hear from this point of view just after the administration change. And we're going to keep this focused on media, hopefully, and focus on joy for 45 minutes.
Azza Cohen is a documentary filmmaker and a leading voice on visual sexism in media. From 2022 to 2025, she served as Vice President Kamala Harris's official videographer, documenting historic moments across the White House, 91 cities in 28 states, 11 countries. Her viral Slate op-ed, "I Was Kamala Harris's Videographer, The Experience Completely Changed Me," trended nationally on Inauguration Day in 2025. As a columnist for The Contrarian, she educated media creators on representing women with dignity and authority. In the spring of 2025, she taught at the Harvard Kennedy School's Institute of Politics and is a fellow at Harvard's Shorenstein Center. Her short film, Float, about her grandmother learning to swim at 82, was acquired by The New Yorker, which is very, very cool. In February of 2025, she co-founded Cohen Borschow Media with wife Kathleen, where they work to shift perspectives, deepen empathy, and build a more expansive world, one story at a time.
Azza, thanks for joining Change the Reel.
Representation starts here. Hey, I want folks to know that you're out there in the world intentionally shifting perspectives in front of and behind the lens, helping people see how using your voice matters and how it can change perspectives. We know you're out there trying to change the real and the story about who is and should be considered a gatekeeper.
So this is the question we always ask. Let's give credit where credit is due. Even if you've never met this person, if you could hand out your flowers today, who would you honor for shaping your entrepreneurial journey?
This is such a good question. I love it so much. I would hand my flowers to the incredible, trailblazing, Academy Award-winning director and producer Vanessa Roth. She is the first female director that I ever got to work with. And I viscerally remember being an intern, 20-something years old, and working with her and just seeing the way that she ran her set with so much empathy, so much curiosity. She was trained as a social worker before becoming a filmmaker, and it really demonstrated to me how directing doesn't have to be one size fits all. I think there's a Hollywood trope, a stereotype that a director is, first of all, a man, in a baseball cap, like yelling at everybody to make sure that everything is running. And working with Vanessa showed me a quiet, yet assertive, yet empathetic method of leadership, because really the director is like a CEO of a small company that is the set. And it really changed my path, showed me how much I wanted to be a director. And I'm working on another project with her right now, and it's just been such a joy to reconnect. And so I would give my flowers to Vanessa for really inspiring me as a director with her personality and her artistic vision.
It's so amazing to be able to work with somebody who is such a great role model. So I'm glad that we asked this question so that you could give those flowers. So I'm
This
glad
is the most beautiful question. It reflects so much on you two that this is the first question you ask of people. I love it.
we're happy to give credit where credit's due, or inspiration, right? Because part of it is, we don't walk around in a vacuum. We actually are a line of people, shoulders that we stand on. So that's why we do it. I want to ask you a little bit about your business. What's at the heart of what you do, and what keeps you motivated to show up and create every day?
Well, in these times, it is sometimes harder than ever and sometimes easier than ever at the same time to show up and create every day. After working for Vice President Harris for 3 years in the White House, and after losing the election, or rather, as I like to say, after America decided to choose a predator, pedophile, business con man as the president over the qualified other candidate. But regardless, after the 2024 election, I was so devastated, so upset, so honestly full of rage every single day that this incredible person that I had spent so much time with and made such a sincere, full body, everyday effort to portray her with the dignity and authority that she deserves every day, to see that person be so torn down in the year 2024, right? When we thought that we had moved past questioning whether women are electable and whether a Black woman in particular could possibly be audacious enough to run for president. It was really hard. And what motivated me was realizing that actually a lot of people in charge of the country and in charge of businesses are deeply mediocre. And I have a really unique perspective. And I had always wanted to start a production company. I have worked for lots of people. And after the election, my wife and I just looked at each other. And instead of saying, why us, we started to say, why not us? And so, in terms of how we create every day, I was just talking about this actually with a friend of mine, Julie Shane, who has an amazing Substack called Inhabit. And she posted recently saying, how do you get the courage to overcome your nervousness of posting something, putting yourself out there, starting a Substack, starting a blog, starting a podcast? I'm sure the two of you have an experience with this. And I said to her, actually, I think of all of the badass women who came before us and had way more reasons to not put themselves out there, and they did, so that we could have an easier time and that the path would be paved for us. So that's what I'm telling myself nowadays is whenever I have imposter syndrome, I just think, what about all of the trailblazers who came before?
Exactly. I mean, we hear this over and over. You are your ancestors' wildest dreams. the, coming to life, right? And so,
Yeah, but there's also the vulnerability too, and to get past the being vulnerable.
right, you draw on your strength from either your own experiences or your think about what your ancestors have gone through, what they had to endure to get to where you are standing. And so now,
So you're right. Is it okay if I go ahead?
no, I'm not done. I am not done.
Well, go ahead then.
All right, so let's talk about your business a little bit. You said, "Why not us?" Explain what it is that you do, so that our audience has a better understanding.
Thank you for this question. Cohen Borschow Media specializes in nonfiction video production from development all the way to delivery. So we work with amazing clients all over the country and soon to be all over the world, where we help them figure out strategy around storytelling. We develop ideas with them, think about the creative ways in which they can tell a story. We provide production services, so camera, light, sound, that type of production. And then we also provide post production, editing, and delivery services. We've done a lot of short form content in the past year and are expanding into features. My wife and I are directing our first feature this year, so we're really excited about that. And everything is really united by our core values of representation, of uplifting women, uplifting queer people, people of color, other marginalized people whose it can seem and feel overwhelming that these stories are not getting told right now with the attacks on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. But what I keep telling myself, and what I'm sure listeners are feeling, is that this is the most important time to double down and tell our stories. And who is going to, if not us?
True. Oh, so now I can go. So, can you share a moment like a specific moment when you realized representation was missing and you were called to step up and be the one to model the change?
What a good question. I think about this moment a lot. Vice President Kamala Harris was the first White House principal to visit an abortion clinic. And I remember planning for this, thinking through the big burden. This was going to be a big press moment. And I thought, okay, how am I going to approach making this video? How am I going to approach the edit, the framing? And as I'm sure you and listeners know, filming or any type of image making inside of an active health clinic is very difficult. It's very fraught. And especially with not only patient privacy, but also the attacks on abortion providers and reproductive health care more generally, we wanted to make sure that everybody felt really comfortable with what we were trying to do, but also understood the opportunity of the moment when the Vice President of the United States shines a light on this issue. So I remember working extensively with the clinic staff, starting with the security team about, okay, you can't show any bit of the floor plan, right? We want to make sure there's no security issues with any part of the video. We want to make sure that no patient at all, even back of head, something like that, no patients are shown at all. We want to blur everybody's identification. You walk past a nurse and make sure that their identity is protected. And at the same time, the very brave clinic director, Dr. Sarah Traxler, said, I want my name. I want to say my name. I want people to know what I do. And that Vice President Kamala Harris came to uplift the work that we do. And something that was a creative decision that was really important to me was when we were working with Dr. Traxler, she initially was dressed very casually. and didn't have her white coat. And I remember saying to her, I want you to put on your white coat because visually people see a white coat and then they assume that it's a doctor, right? And I think in our world where representation of women in leadership positions is already so sparse, it was really important to me that people not make assumptions about this doctor because she wasn't wearing a white coat. So we put her in the white coat. And then the other framing decision that was really important to me, and I'll send you the video so you can see it and link it for folks if they haven't. But it was really important to me to not just have the vice president in the frame by herself talking about the importance of this. I wanted you to see her with the clinic staff, with this doctor, so that it became not just a visual story of one singular politician making a statement, but that it was a communal statement about the healthcare providers and the work that they do. So I thought a lot about, I practiced the shot a couple of times. You know, I got to Minnesota a day early before the vice president just to make sure that we could really nail this. And to your question, Piper, about representation, I'm not saying that someone of a different gender wouldn't take seriously the issue of abortion access in this country. But I take it seriously because I'm a woman and because this is something that I viscerally understand. And that is why representation matters. It's not about lessening the pie for anyone else. It's about thinking, what different stories can we tell?
Right. You know, we talked to Natalie Bullock Brown, who is part of DOG. It is you may be familiar with DOG. It's a cooperative in New York. Cannot remember what the acronym is, but she talks.
I know, I've heard of it, and I also don't know what the acronym is.
You know, it's like, who is best positioned to tell the story? And you had that real feeling of the stakes of your own life in a different way than the person standing next to you. And so I feel like, you know, you've answered this question in a great way to give our audience an understanding of where you were and understanding that the representation and who's behind the camera and who is actually telling the story makes a difference. And so how did you, you know, I know that you've come to this job and you're doing this particular job, but how did it push you to create the change that you wanted to see?
When I first heard about the job, I thought it was not real because it just seemed too good to be true, being the videographer to the first woman vice president of the United States. I mean, as a filmmaker, I just couldn't imagine literally anything more exciting. And what an opportunity, not just from a video perspective, but a historic perspective, right? Because every day that I filmed Vice President Harris doing something was the first time that a woman had done that thing in that role, right? And so going back briefly to Piper's question about representation, it matters who's behind the camera and it matters who's in front of it, right? And it's this chicken and egg cycle that I write about on my Substack and I teach about, right? That the less we are able to show women in their full dignity and authority, political, business, sports, all of the arenas in which women are public figures, the less that we have better representation behind the camera to make sure that those people in front of the camera are taken seriously, the less you feel comfortable with the idea of a woman in this type of power and in this type of authority. So it's just a vicious cycle, right? So I also think it's not a coincidence that the first White House principal to ever go to an abortion clinic was the first woman. So not only was it about me thinking, okay, from my personal perspective, how can I make this an important visual moment? it's also because Kamala Harris decided to be brave and do something that no man in her position had done before, president or vice president. So I'm so sorry, Monique. I forgot your question.
It is about, like, how did you push to create the change that you wanted to see? And so you see
Oh,
this job and you're thinking, that's for me.
I had so much imposter syndrome basically every single day of the job. I viscerally remember on my first day that I was filming her was July 22nd, 2022. And it was the anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So much of her day and the White House generally was focused on uplifting this anniversary. It's a landmark piece of legislation. And as someone with a chronic migraine condition, like, I really appreciate the protections of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so I was really excited because it's personal to me. And I remember the vice president, had an open press conference before she was going to meet in a private roundtable with activists from the disability community. And I was so excited. And she introduced herself and did a visual description, which is very common for people who want to be inclusive of a disabled crowd. And obviously, on the anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, it makes special sense to do a visual description. She described her outfit and sort of like the room. I don't exactly remember her exact words, but then, gosh, later that day, not even a couple hours after this event, we had TVs with every news channel on in the White House all the time. So I see that there's this Fox News piece about, why would Kamala Harris describe herself? Anybody can see that she's a woman, and basically denigrating her for doing a visual description. And in that moment, I lost my imposter syndrome, because I thought, this is so much bigger than whether I'm nervous. Like, this is such a big battle where every single thing she says, even if it's the smart thing, even if it's the right thing, even if it's the respectful thing, she will be torn down every second of every day. And it's not my job to be nervous. It's not my job to worry about whether or not I can do this, because I was hired and I can do this. And I know how to use this camera, and I know how to capture people in a way that makes them look good. So that moment was really visceral for me. And so when you think about, okay, how do you change the perspective? Every day I just thought, how do I show this in my unique lens, right? We love a camera pun, unchange the reel. um, how do I pick a different angle that maybe someone else isn't thinking of? How do I bring my own personal lived experience as an American to this particular issue that she is exploring? And so, again, that goes back to that question of representation. Representation in front of the camera is so important. And also, it's very critical behind the camera, because the making of images is a subjective art. And people assume that a picture is some objective truth, right? But as I always say to people, ask yourself, who took this picture? What is outside of the four walls of the frame? What story isn't being told? And I think about that. I thought about that a lot in that job in particular. And I think about it now every day as a cinematographer in other contexts. And that's really where the representation matters, because we can't just take for granted that the picture that's being shown to us is somehow the truth or the only depiction.
Right. There's no bias included, because there is. And so
Exactly.
And so this leads me to, but we have to tweak it a little bit. It's like, why inclusion matters in who's making media and who's telling the story. And so what's been the most rewarding in figuring out, well, having you behind the lens, pointing at a very varied things in front of the lens. Why does it matter that somebody like you is doing this?
It matters to have more women in particular behind the camera, because what I ask for is 50-50, right? If we're 50% of the population, we need to be behind the camera 50% of the time. And that is not even close to what we're dealing with, right? I sincerely hope that by the time this podcast comes out, Autumn Arkapaw will have won the Oscar for Best Cinematography, making her the first woman to ever win in that category, which is, again, insane that in 2026 we've yet to have a woman actually win this category, right? So fighting for this inclusion is so essential, because we are depriving ourselves and audiences of really talented, creative people when we don't have as much diversity behind the camera as in front of it, and as reflects our country.
Yeah. And so, you're speaking about, the sort of thing, and I'm wondering, in your career, if you've heard, like I've heard, um, women aren't funny, and nobody cares about such and such a story. And for us, it was, looking for representation. For me, it was about representation, looking for, where are the Latinos on TV? Where are the, you know, the LGBTQ folks that are, living their best life and not just a punchline or a joke. And so growing up, that was like where I was and what I heard. And so it makes me wonder, it's like, you're in a different generation and things have definitely changed. But even now, I mean, we're still looking for our first cinematography win as a woman. And, we're still looking for the right representation, not right, a different representation on screen, because even when I see new shows, I'm a big TV fan, new shows with multiple cast members, I'm always thinking, are they going to cast a Latino this time? And I'm often disappointed. Not that they aren't great shows and funny, have different perspectives, but I'm wondering where you are in your career and your experience about what you've encountered in your pursuit to be the one behind the lens.
I got into filmmaking because I love people and I love stories, and I really sincerely believe in narrative change. I was not the kid who watched a ton of movies and obsessed over lighting design or studied Scorsese. I've actually never seen The Godfather. I need to watch it. But like, that is not what brought me into filmmaking. I got into filmmaking because I took a class in college and was lucky enough to have another person to give flowers to, is my beloved documentary film teacher, Purcell Carson, who referred me to the White House job and was the first person to, teach me about filmmaking. And just a quick side note about her. She's an Academy Award winner, just an incredible, incredible documentary film editor and director. And when I was a senior in college, I was applying all these jobs and I wasn't getting callbacks for video producing, anything like that. And I was so nervous about it. So I go to her and I thought, maybe my resume is off. Can you take a look at my resume? And I showed her my resume, and at the top of the resume, it said, Azza Cohen, aspiring filmmaker. And she didn't even read the rest of it. She looked me dead in the eye and said, don't put aspiring. You are a filmmaker. If you've made one film, you are a filmmaker. Why are you underestimating yourself? And I think about that so often. I tell this to interns and PAs and people who we are lucky enough to work with, because it's so often that women especially just are the last people to not even brag, but just literally acknowledge the work that we have done. And so I think that's a really important part of representation too, is getting comfortable with saying, I did this, I did this, I did this, and I deserve to be here. I am the qualified candidate to be here, and not worry about what others may be saying to you or doubting you or underestimating you. And so I think also to your question, literally 100% of US presidents have been a man. So when Americans close their eyes and picture the president of the United States, they picture a man. And it goes deeper than just politics. It's our entire culture, right? TV shows, for the most part, if there is a TV show that concerns American politics, the president is very likely a man, right? Not 100% of the time, but almost 100% of the time. And so if we don't show women in leadership positions, even fictionally, we cannot, as viewers, get comfortable with the idea that this is possible, right? Geena Davis, the iconic, incredible actor, producer, she started an organization and research organization that tracks various representation in media. And she has a slogan, if she can see it, she can be it, right? And if you can't see it, how do little girls think that their future in, politics or other types of representation is possible, right? Famously, there was a Barbie astronaut before Sally Ride, right? We have to imagine that these things are possible before they actually are possible. And so I just think it's not just, again, robbing Americans of a woman leader to not take women in politics or other leadership positions seriously. It's robbing us of qualified, incredible candidates because we are wired in our brains to not take them as seriously as the male candidate.
Right.
Amen.
And so, we get, this whole, having that representation, having those role models. And, we're very familiar with the Geena Davis Institute's work. We follow its progression.
We're all fans here.
Yeah, we're all friends. We love that, that there's somebody actually counting the numbers and then showing, Hollywood itself. It's like, look, do better. We're showing you can, there's room. And there's data that says you can make $1 billion at the box office with women's issues. So,
right.
And so those are all the amazing things that we have. In your own career, what's been the most rewarding or challenging weaving in this idea of fully who you are authentically? What's been the most rewarding part of that in your career?
To me, the best part about working for Vice President Harris was, obviously, it was very cool to get to travel the world. Obviously, it was very cool to get to see world leaders and be in rooms that obviously I otherwise wouldn't be in. But really, the thing that got me out of bed every morning was, without a doubt, when I would see a young girl, especially a young Black girl, in the crowd. And when I would see a young Black girl in the crowd looking at Kamala Harris, I would always remain composed, but internally sobbing, because thinking about what that little girl got to see that Kamala Harris didn't get to see, that none of us got to see, right? A woman in that role. It's just, you never know how that's going to change the trajectory of that kid's life. And further, also little kids of all genders, and especially little boys, seeing, again, a woman in this role and getting comfortable with a woman being the executive leader. And I think I just think about that so often. And every time that I'm lensing someone, I just think about what kind of visual world are we showing to this current generation and the next generations after? And how can we make sure that that leadership is fair and representative?
I love this. It reminds me, just sort of having that representation that, the WNBA has these little boy fans out there, like wearing
I love them
jerseys.
so much.
I know, right? And so, this happens because, the
Like
TV.
the little boys with the Caitlin Clark jerseys.
Yeah, these fanboys, which I love because, and I think directly due to the fact that there's greater coverage, the more people fill the in-person space, filling arenas, means the broadcasters are looking to put eyeballs on the screen. So they're willing to also put that out there. And so we can prove we can, be at the highest levels of politics or of leadership in nonprofit and leadership of, human rights and leadership in sports. And I think that in general is one of the things that I'm going to give flowers to you about, because you were able to lens some of this and really be part of that flywheel of getting representation in front of the camera in a meaningful way. So thank you for that.
I mean, and there's also the huge thing of starting off in the industry of being a sound person. And, I didn't think about it. I was just like, oh, I know sound. I'm going to go do it. And then if there was a little girl on set and her staring at me, and I can't even imagine. I mean, like, it's first I'm going, oh, I'm working and I'm being watched, and I know why I'm being watched, and having people come up and go, I've never been on a set before with a female sound person. I've never been on a set before. I watch it with a female camera op or a DP. And it's like all of a sudden when that conversation starts, like there's a second reason you're there. It's like, oh, I have a second job now. And I mean, even in just small productions, here you are at the White House. And so you're also on display. I can't even imagine. I mean, you helped us see history in a different way. I mean, that is huge. And to wear that weight so effortlessly and going, okay, this is my job. I mean, yeah, I guess I'm giving flowers to you too.
Yeah,
it's like,
it's a big deal.
It is. It's a big deal. It really is.
You were just doing your job, but I just want you to know, I mean, it's a big deal because, when I read the article in Slate and I thought, I could have done this, but I'm so glad that you had done it and then spoke out about what you saw
and spoke out about it.
Behind the lens, you saw what you saw. You saw it in a way that was about sex and misogyny. The idea that people are how they treat people can be a little racist. You're bringing your bias. And so like having you put that into words and to actually consciously and with thought break through that and call it for what it is and actually work against those things of bias. It's big for what I see culturally and what should be out in the world in general as far as people knowing about. So that's one of the reasons why I reached out after that and I wanted to have this conversation. Now, I miss Kathleen because I would love to get to know her too. So maybe in the future we
will have to get her as well. I also wanted to share, I mentioned it in my Slate article, but on the power of representation. So we were in a photo line and this little girl, 7-year-old Ellie, she met the vice president, was so excited, and she shared that she loves to write. And what was so powerful and feminist about, and continues to be about Kamala Harris, is instead of saying, oh, that's so cute, you know, good for you, she says, oh, you should write a book. If you want to be a writer, you should write a book. And who knew that this 7-year-old would actually go and write a book? And she did. She wrote a book called The Girl with the Loudest Voice about a little girl speaking up. And I just, listen, Ellie is very impressive, and she probably would have written this book anyway. But that is so important, because when you have a woman in that leadership position, and I mean, people of all genders do this, right? You see a little girl and you say, you're so cute. Oh, I like your dress, right? And you never say that to little boys, right? And I just think seeing someone in that position and hearing from the Vice President of the United States telling you to write a book and encouraging your dreams, you know, what a transformational thing that was. And that's also one of those moments that I just think back to a lot, and it keeps me going.
Yeah, I mean, it is all the things, right? You have just like a lot of energy and a lot of different experiences in this one short amount of time. I mean, I'm sure it felt like a very long time to you, but you know, you'll look back on your life and just be so full of appreciation and gratitude for the experience in general.
And I know you've spoken on this, but how has media and storytelling helped you amplify your voice or connect with your audience in a way that feels authentic to you?
Well, I also want to say, Piper, to you, that sound is such an intimate role on set. And I am so glad that you have been that trailblazer for little girls on set, for actresses of any age, really, because sound is so, you have to get so close to the person,
Right.
you have to figure the right place for the love. Like, it's really one of the most intimate jobs that occur on a film set. And this has been my experience as well, where when we hire female sound people, we just get great feedback, especially from women who've been in situations where, you know, you just feel like a museum exhibit where people are just touching you and putting something on your shirt, and it's very uncomfortable. And they really appreciate how, you know, it's not so clean along a gender binary, of course, but 9 times out of 10, if you hire a sound girl, you're going to get an experience where that person takes the extra time to make you feel comfortable. So I also think representation in sound is really, really important. And it's so cool that you've been able to be that representation. In terms of like telling my story to the world, I was a little nervous about the Slate article, but I also was mostly just so full of rage that I thought, maybe like a couple of Kamala Stan girlies will read this article and feel something on Inauguration Day that I'm feeling. And the reception completely shocked me. But also, once I thought about it more, did not shock me, because clearly there are so many people who around the world were devastated by the election, not necessarily because of some kind of political alignment, but seeing a really qualified, excellent woman be torn down in such a merciless, clearly biased, clearly unfair fashion, right? And what it meant so viscerally, so emotionally, so profoundly to, again, to so many types of people, but especially to women and girls, especially to women and girls of color. I think it's so important to not overlook that that was extremely emotional and very difficult to think and witness that and then experience what we experienced. So I was nervous. You know, I worked with an incredible editor at Slate, Natalie Shuttler. Shout out to Natalie. You are brilliant. And shout out to my writing agent, Bridget Matsey, another absolutely brilliant editor who helped me get that piece across the finish line. But since then, I've just realized that a lot of people don't know what goes on behind the camera. They don't know how the sausage gets made, and that I have this interesting, different perspective, different angle, different lens, that is really should be a part of the conversation. Because I think so many people are aware that media literacy generally is important, that understanding a biased headline or a biased quote is something that folks should pay attention to. But for the most part, if you're not a camera person or really steeped in like photo editing or the picking of a newspaper cover page, like you don't necessarily know or assume that images are biased. Every image has a subjective take, and that's okay. But the problem is when we don't analyze it and have skepticism around it. And clearly now with AI, with fake news, with misinformation and disinformation, it's really such an important time for all of us as camera folks to raise our voices, to tell our stories, because people really are interested. I've had so many people reach out and say, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I didn't even think about a high angle versus a low angle. I didn't even think about, a single shot or a really wide shot with more context, how that affects your understanding of the situation. And so I'm just out here telling my truth. And of course, the haters gonna hate, but the internet, and I've had my fair share of existential moments thinking, okay, the internet is so big and it's such a swamp and it's so racist and sexist and awful. How can I possibly think that my little Substack articles are somehow like chipping away at it? But then I also say, for every person that you provide a new perspective to, that is change. And that changes the real.
It totally changes the real. I love having a chance to introduce our audience to amazing change makers that are showing up authentically and are actively trying to change the real for people that look like us, right? If folks want to know more about your work, how can they work with you, get to know you better? How do they interact with you?
Thank you so much. My DMs are open. Follow me on Instagram at Azza Cohen, AZZACOHEN. Same with my Substack, substack.com/Azza Cohen. I love to hear from people. I love to get tips, especially on Substack, from readers of people saying, oh my gosh, this image is so crazy. Can you analyze it? Or,
Wow.
somebody wrote in to tell me, somebody in Boston said, oh, Mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu, is pregnant and there's really sexist coverage of what's going on. Can you look at it? And I said, oh my God, I would love to. And that's one of my favorite pieces that I've written. So please follow me on Instagram, get in touch on Instagram or Substack, and we would be really thrilled to collaborate. My wife and I, our company is based in DC, but we go all around the country, all around the world. And so we'd be happy to hear from you. And something that we're hoping to launch soon is on our website, we want to put a directory of baddies who we want to recommend that you work with. So, again, our amazing, diverse crew of people, camera people, sound people, lighting, editing, all sorts of people. So if you're interested in being included in this directory, again, just like DM me or message me on Substack. I'd be happy to read about your work and potentially uplift it. So get in touch. And I think it's really important for all of us to uplift each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are great ideas, and like doing the things to help uplift others. Thank you, Azza. We had so much fun. It was so interesting. I'm glad we got this conversation.
Yes, it was perfect.
It was. It was. And for our audience, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this episode of Change the Reel.
If you liked it, hit subscribe, share the episode, or drop a comment. We actually read them.
Connect with us or any of our guests on LinkedIn. Check the show notes for links.
And if you're done with DIY and ready to record something that matters in a safe, inclusive space, check out our studio at VelasquezMedia.com.
Remember,
Representation starts here.